Hello again and welcome back. I am Jared Case, curator of film exhibitions at the Dryden Theater and the George Eastman Museum. And we've got another streaming recommendation for you. This one comes with a special guest. I am very pleased to welcome Criss Austin, who is a graduate of the L. Jeffrey Selznick School of Film Preservation from 2002, also happens to be my classmate, and she works at the United States National Archives. Welcome, Criss.
Hey, Jared, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me to come and talk about The True Glory today.
We're very happy to see friends that we've known for a while and also to talk about where you are in the world and what you've been doing. So tell us a little bit about your position at NARA.
So I am the supervisor of the Motion Picture Preservation Lab at the National Archives. It's kind of a hefty long string of words for the title. I've been there now for 19 years and been the supervisor since 2006. And we're fortunate at the archives that we're able to do film-to-film preservation along with digital preservation and restorations. So we also assist the archival unit with what we refer to as technical processing. So we actually help the archivist determine which physical copies to keep in the collection, whereas they're responsible for bringing in new accessions and determining what titles we're going to keep. And we bring in records from all over the country from various federal agencies. I believe we are the second largest film repository in the country.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, because we know how large the Library of Congress is over all those years collecting things that were deposited, but you collect all these governmental records, not only film, but the paper and everything else that comes along with it.
Yeah, so NARA actually has, I believe, in total, somewhere around 35 facilities, including 14 presidential libraries. And even though we have somewhere on the order of 1.5 million audio, video, and motion picture records, that makes up 0.06% of the entire collection.
That is amazing. So you are still doing film to film and digital as well. Is it the priority to do film to film?
We want to do film to film as long as we possibly can, just because in a lot of ways for us, it's easier to store and identify physical records than it is to deal with large data volumes from digital preservation. So our digital preservation requirements are DPX files. And if we're preserving 10 minutes in 4K, that's a terabyte right there. So at this point in time, we're still going film to film whenever we can. And then for special projects or for items that we can't photochemically preserve because of the condition, we'll do digital preservation.
And is there anything in particular that you remember from your year at the Selznick School that you apply on a regular basis?
Actually, right before we started, we were talking about Ed Stratman and, what a great guy he was. And I remember him teaching me how to splice film. So not having had any experience with film before I came to the Selznick School, this was all super foreign to me. And Ed was very patient in explaining to me how a guillotine splicer worked, or a tape splicer. And I think I probably sat at a bench and tape spliced for hours and hours over my lunch break, and then hours and hours of cement splicing over our lunch breaks. And, I'll say it paid off, because we do it a lot, all the time.
So when I asked you to do a conversation recommending something, you brought up one of your own preservations that you wanted to talk about. Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So The True Glory is a film that was made by the Office of War Information and the British Ministry of Information just after the end of World War II. And it tells the story of the war in Europe beginning in the spring of 1944 and goes through D-Day and the fall of Germany at the end of World War II. And one of the reasons that we preserved it is because and did the restoration was because the 70th anniversary was in 2014. And we put a lot of time and effort into this, and we're pretty proud of the result. So that's part of the reason why I wanted to share that with everyone today.
And what was the preservation like? Was it a single element that you came from? I know when they were producing it, it came from many different elements as they were putting it together.
Right, so we had actually reached out to the Imperial War Museum where the original negative is held, and they also have the Oscar, which they had taken from the British Embassy years and years ago in LA. And it was determined at that point in time that their original negative was actually made up of a lot of duplicate material. And it was mostly like sort of library shot material. When the True Glory was put together, it was taken from, I don't know, thousands of, I think it was 1,400 different cameramen and thousands of shots. And so we decided, instead of asking to borrow their negative, which had, you know, all of the original splices and those sorts of things, that we were going to go from one of our negatives to do it. And we were fairly pleased with the results, though it did present some challenges. Just the drastic quality differences between, you know, things that were shot well and things that were not shot well, or things that had been reprinted more often than other sections. So we had a lot to try to work with.
And just to give the audience a sense of what they'll be seeing, it's not, well, it does have a narrative in that there's voiceovers of all these people that were involved in the invasion and subsequent march towards Germany. But it's a documentary, it's documentary footage that was shot by all of these different cameramen and then assembled after the war.
Yeah, exactly. And it was pretty remarkable for its time because it gave voice to people from all over the world. It also gave voice to people that you are normally used to hearing from, like women or Black soldiers. It was also intermixed with civilians along with military personnel. It was remarkable to have then General Dwight D. Eisenhower give the opening, but General Patton is also in there talking about some of the events. And since I'm not on site, I don't have access to the production file to tell you exactly where that is, but he is in there. I think I said this before, but I think there are about 1,400 different cameramen. So they really pulled it from all over, as you will see and hear.
Do you know anything, or can you remember without your files in front of you, anything about the production? As I was watching this, the editing of it is so not of the style of the 1940s. It's very quick, very short shots that someone must have spent just days putting together to try to complete this narrative.
Yeah, it was pretty difficult, and it was directed by Carol Reed and Garson Kanin. And this was the first time they'd ever made a documentary. And I think that they were really trying to make it different and also show the pace at which, I think that they were trying to mimic the pace at which troops were trying to get things together, and, you know, including the planning. So there are the sections that, you know, do have that very, you know, fast-paced narrative with all of the different clips. But then where there are the slow parts where, you know, they're waiting for the next portion of the battle to start, and it's just this sense of dread, I think that they really managed to capture that as well.
It's a really extraordinary film, and we were fortunate enough to borrow that 35 millimeter print from you last year when we did a short series on the 75th anniversary. And I think it went over really well. And some of the people who had relatives or even were involved in the conflict were very moved by what they saw on screen.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that I particularly appreciate about the True Glory is that it just really has a great way of giving you the sense of scale and the amount of sacrifice that went into ending the war. I can't imagine trying to coordinate anything on that scale without the modern technology that we have now. And there are also just portions that are heartbreaking. The humanitarian toll is just sort of crushingly obvious. So I feel like it gives a really great scope. And I also appreciate that there are some humorous moments in there. I have a couple of favorite sort of, I guess, funny parts, for lack of a better term. Early on, I think around the 8-minute mark, there's a scene where there's a raft full of troops being dashed against the rocks. And the narration is a soldier reading an army recruiting pamphlet, and the juxtaposition between the scenes and the information is pretty amusing. And then my other favorite part is where a member of the Army Map Service talks about how he couldn't keep up with supplying maps to the troops because they were moving so fast and they had literally gone off the map. And I never thought about how that term came to be before I started working on this film.
Yeah, and it's as realistic as Hollywood tries to get this experience. There's really nothing quite like seeing the actual footage. I don't know if there's a certain frisson that whether you're told ahead of time that it's real footage or you just know inherently, but we also played John Ford's The Battle of Midway at the Nitrate Picture Show. And it's the same sort of thing in that you're realizing maybe it's the fact that the shots are not composed well, that you know that something real is happening and they're just happening to capture it at that point.
Yeah, and I mean, it's very obvious also throughout the True Glory when they had time to set up these shots. And there are times when it's very obvious that they were trying to get some footage and not die at the same time. And that was one of the things that also was difficult about restoring this, is that the battle footage and the areas where the footage had been duplicated so many times were really difficult to clean up. And we were never able to get them to look as good as, you know, the shots where things are stationary or the shots were planned. But it does give you that real sense of, you know, this is something that happened in reality. Also talking about Battle of Midway, you know, the shots where the camera loses framing and it rolls through the gate because an explosion has happened and it's rattled everything in the camera. I feel like that's a bit of Hollywood that doesn't quite come through. It's, you know, you see the action, but you don't feel it in the same manner.
Yeah, you were talking about the different sources that this came from, and I was also wondering about the sound. Maybe you can talk about both. And that during the preservation, did you make an effort to make it look a little more seamless? With all these shots, there had to be a bunch of timing that was going on. And with the sound, was there an effort to clean that up a bit? Or were you coming from film for that as well?
Yes, so we used a duplicate negative along with its accompanying soundtrack. So it's a composite negative. And we actually listened to, because I think we got about 8 different copies of the film. And so we actually listened to all 8 of them to figure out what the best source material was going to be. And now that I'm thinking back on it, I think we actually decided to use a print just because the sharpness of the track is better on a print than it is on a negative. And we did do sort of digital cleanup on both the print as well as the soundtrack. And we used Pro Tools to do the cleanup with some of their restoration software. And so we kept that as a file, but then we also kept a separate file that actually contains nothing but the defects in it, just to show people, you know, what was removed and to, you know, authenticate the new track that we had made. And then for the print, we used our restoration software that does some manual fixes and dust and dirt and scratch removal, those sorts of things. And it does a good job for the most part, except for anywhere where there's a lot of movement. and because it maps the information from the frame before and the frame after. So if there is a lot of movement, it will actually introduce digital artifacts. And so in those cases, we just left the defects in because we felt like it was better to leave the original defect than introduce a new one.
Better to leave the information in than erase it due to digital.
Yeah, and the maps were actually one of the most difficult things, even though they were the cleanest, because it's a stationary map, but they're usually zooming into one part of it, which made cleanup there a challenge.
And all the fine lines that then are moving across the image.
Yes.
Computer can take that.
Yeah.
So, do you recall what the length of this preservation project was?
I do very well. So the True Glory is 81 minutes long, and it took my colleague at the time, Harry Snodgrass, and I 240 hours to do the restoration. So it is a really time-consuming process, because even though you're doing like the automated dust and fix and scratch removal, you still need to go through and look at every frame just to make sure that nothing has been introduced, or if there's something that the tool missed that you can remove manually. So it took a long time, but it was worth it.
And from inception of the project to production of the new 35mm print, was that a year, 10 months?
No, we were asked to do this in a very compressed time frame. And so we began the project, I want to say in the beginning of April, and we had to have it finished by Memorial Day, essentially. So there were a lot of late evenings and weekend work to try to get the job done.
That was all you did for 2 months?
Yeah, it was.
So with all of the work that you and the Archives Administration has put into this, I don't want to send people to just any other copy of the True Glory that they might find somewhere. So is there a screening room or a version of the restored copy that we can send people to?
Yes, so the National Archives has their own YouTube channel, and if you were to just Google National Archives and the True Glory, it should come right up. Or you can also visit NARA's YouTube channel. And I think it's one of the, since it's one of the most popular films that we have, I think it's right there on the home screen. And if not, you can search for it on NARA's channel as well.
We'll pick up a link to that and we'll put that in the notes for this video so people can go directly there as well. Is there a screening room, a physical 35mm screening room at the archives?
Yeah, we are fortunate enough to have a 250-seat theater downtown at the main archives building. It's the McGowan Theater. And in normal times, we have regular screenings there. And recently, we just started our own sort of virtual screening program, and hopefully we'll be issuing more productions, maybe as fun as these ones.
So in the spirit of the cinematic experience and bringing all these work, the original director of the department, James Card, had a saying that his version of hell would be having a working projector and all of the films available, but no one to watch them with. So that cinematic experience is what we're trying to really promote, even with these streaming screenings, but getting people excited about getting back to the theater. So I've got a little 5-question survey about cinematic experiences I'd like to run past you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Do you remember your first cinematic experience?
Yes, I do. I think I was around 4, maybe 5. And the first thing I saw in the theater was Fox and the Hound. And I still, to this day, remember being absolutely terrified of the bear that comes after the Fox and the Hound at the end. I remember a little bit later on, I'd gotten like the little Disney book with the tape cassette, and I would hide under my bed whenever the tape got to that point.
Was there a neighborhood theater, a theater that you went to regularly as you were growing up? And tell us about that.
Yeah, we did have a neighborhood theater. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, and we would go to the Westmoreland Theater matinees every Saturday and Sunday. It was usually a double feature, and at the elementary school that I went to, they would sell books of tickets, and so you would get a sheet that had 16 tickets that would last you for 4 weeks, and then you would buy them each month. So it was good for the movie, as well as a little, container of popcorn and a small drink. And, it was probably a 15 or 20-minute walk to the theater, and we would just spend all afternoon there and then come home. It was great.
What is your favorite sensory experience when you go to the theater?
Oh, I really, and I think that they still do this, but I always love the THX sound. I don't even know if you call it a trailer, but just the the whole experience with the and it just, it shakes the auditorium a little bit, and it gives me goosebumps every time. But in addition to that, I love the huge screen. I don't think that anybody's, 72-inch screen TV at home can do a theater justice. So if I can see it in 35 millimeter on the big screen or 70 millimeter on the big screen, even better.
Where do you sit when you go to the theater?
In the middle of the middle. In fact, I usually make sure that I get there with enough time so I can get that spot. Because I don't want to be off kilter. So, and I want to have my entire field of vision full of the screen. And that's where they try to make the audio hit too. So it's perfect.
And one last question. Do you have a favorite book about film, or maybe something having to do with your position there, something that you made a big impression on you when you read it?
I can't really think of anything that is specifically, either pointed me in this direction or has necessarily informed well, that's not true. I will say that, the FIAF principles of film archiving, the code of ethics, that is probably the thing that I go back to the most for, the decisions that I make about restorations and the work that we do, sort of the, do no harm principle, which speaks to, not inserting digital artifacts and leaving things the way that they were, making sure that the restorations that we do are historically accurate, that we're not changing any of the information. So I will say, I guess, that those are my guiding principles.
Well, that's great. I think that's a wonderful answer. It's not necessarily something that's published, but it's something that's written and has really guided your work, which is what this conversation is all about. So I think that's a good answer.
Okay.
Criss Austin, thank you again so much for joining us on this conversation. And we are looking forward to more restorations coming from the National Archives. And we hope that you will be able to come back to Rochester at some point in time and visit us here at the Dryden.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a year and a half until our 20-year reunion, right?
Yeah, I guess so. We'll have to do something.
For sure. So, well, thank you, Jared. Good luck with everything there, and we'll talk to you soon.